Rajaleaks introduces this AI-rendered voice generated from an essay written by Professor Robert Gordon, former personal secretary to, and the first Western person designated as a Brahmachari, and deerskin carrier, by Maharishi. These skin boys, as they were called in the TM movement, were close confidants of Maharishi, who saw the inner workings of Maharishi's inner circle. Robert has a PhD from Princeton University. He has held posts at the Universities of California, New Mexico, and Oregon, with a specialty in American religious history. Part 13, Bamboozled Hearts, the dark secrets of Maharishi's ashram and the choices they faced. But this time Linda was put off by the tawdriness of it all and told Maharishi that what they were doing was wrong and immoral. His response: the Maharishi just laughed that off. Crushed and confused, Linda broke off the affair and returned to London, suffering devastating psychological consequences for years after. She just couldn't stand being kissed or touched, and felt ashamed that she'd been manipulated by Maharishi, and just couldn't see that he was a dirty old man. Maharishi's next victim arrived at the ashram when a new initiator training course began in January of 1970. That course brought into Maharishi's sights a young American girl named Judith Bork. She was there for what would prove to be the last course for new initiators at Shankaracharya Nagar, Maharishi's ashram. It wasn't long before sexy Sadie singled her out for special instruction. Judith tells the whole 2-year story in her book Robes of Silk, Feet of Clay. Unlike the previous victims in our account, Judith fell in love, at least in the early days of her affair. When a young girl gets hit on by her perfect master, she faces a difficult choice. She must decide either that he's just a dirty old man in master's clothing, or that there is some cosmic reason why the once forbidden is now somehow okay, that she is the chosen one, called to sexually service the master for some higher cosmic purpose. We have seen that Mia, Rosalind, Gunilla, the unidentified British girl, and even Linda, finally, made the first choice. Judith chose door number 2. Events would prove that she was not the chosen one, just another bamboozled victim. But the ride was great while it lasted, and I was right there for it too. I began the practice of TM in fall 1967, a little before the Beatles were initiated. I was then an undergraduate at the University of Colorado in Boulder, majoring in philosophy. Soon after I started TM, I had a life-changing experience of the awakening of Kundalini and decided to get more involved in the TM movement. I was accepted to attend a month-long course in Squaw Valley, California with Maharishi during the summer of 1968. Its purpose was to deepen our experience of meditation, our understanding of the spiritual principles that undergirded it, and to train us in starting TM groups on the various campuses where we were students. After the course, I returned to Boulder and established a student club, arranged for initiations of new TM practitioners, and quickly built the Boulder Center into one of the most successful in the country. Interestingly, given our Beatles focus, the first initiator to come to Boulder was Terry Gustafson, immortalized by the Beatles in their song, Get Back. He was on their course in India, and became Jojo the Loner, I'm sure the only U.S. Forest Service ranger to have a Beatles song written about him. It is another of the many songs which were inspired by the Beatles' sojourn in Rishikesh. Based on my success in Boulder, I was accepted to attend the next initiator training course in India, set for fall 1969. After 4 months of travel to Europe, North Africa, Turkey, everyone nice, Iran, everyone friendly and gracious, and Afghanistan, when the Taliban had not yet blown up the towering Buddhas of Bamiyan, and an American could still drive the Khyber Pass, I finally arrived in New Delhi and met for the first time my fellow course participants. We spent a few days in Delhi, then flew to Kashmir where, like the Beatles course, we spent 2 weeks in houseboats on the shores of Dal Lake near Srinagar. From there we traveled to the ashram in Rishikesh, where long meditation would begin in earnest. Part 14, Spiritual Transformation and Intrigue, My Journey Through India's Ashrams and Mysteries. We spent a few days in Delhi, then flew to Kashmir where, like the Beatles course, we spent 2 weeks in houseboats on the shores of Dal Lake near Srinagar. From there we traveled to the ashram in Rishikesh, where long meditation would begin in earnest. During the phase in the initiator training when I was meditating 14 or 15 hours per day, I had even more powerful experiences of awakening Kundalini, which produced not only bliss, but also the external experience of what was then called in the movement God consciousness, the actual visual appearance of the divinely radiant golden light suffusing all relative existence. When I recounted these experiences during one of the evening lectures at the ashram, Maharishi responded by saying, "Beautiful, beautiful," repeatedly. When the lecture ended, I spontaneously leaped to my feet, rushed to the side of the stage where he would exit, knelt before his sandals, and held them as he put them on. When I arose, he stroked my long hair and said, "You are my golden boy." I now became one of his favorites. When we had been made initiators and were set to leave the ashram, Maharishi asked me if it would be possible for me to stay on for the next course, set to begin in January of 1970. He wanted me to help with the new trainees and with other duties at the ashram. I eagerly accepted and became, along with Abhay, Maharishi's skin boys. The name derives from the fact that the skin boy carries Maharishi's dear skin and places it wherever he is to sit. It was the most coveted position in the TM movement because the skin boy is always with the master, getting his darshan or spiritual juice, thought to be the greatest boost to one's spiritual evolution. Abhay, just a wonderful Indian boy from the Himalayan town of Nainital, and I quickly became the dearest of friends and shared the joy of serving the master. We all pitched in to ready the ashram for the next initiator training course. Soon after the new trainees arrived, Maharishi began showing a lot of interest in Judith. After she read a poem at one of the evening lectures, Maharishi asked her to come to his house to read him more poems. That night, he sent me and Abhay to escort her to his house, and he then told us to go and rest, quite uncommon since one or the other of us was always with him until his last visitor departed and he went to bed. Although he would tell us to go and rest, instead, often we would sit, wrapped in thick woolen winter blankets, in a secluded nook where we could neither be seen nor heard, our quiet voices masked by the roar of the Ganges down the cliffs from the ashram. From this vantage point we regularly saw Judith coming down the path to Maharishi's house late at night after everyone else had retired. At first, we didn't make much of these furtive, nocturnal visits. But as they continued, we began to make jokes about the poetry girl and the real purpose of her visits. During daylight hours, Judith was clearly Maharishi's favorite, always greeted effusively and asked to sit near the master. So effusively, in fact, that I began to suspect what was going on during their secret, late nights together. I also noticed that she began dressing differently from everyone else. Instead of the poor student, hippie chic, or cheap cotton Indian Punjabis commonly worn, she was suddenly rocking expensive saris, gold jewelry, and makeup too. All very uncommon in the ashram's almost anchoritic vibe. I wondered at this change, since in a casual chat she had told me of the work, scraping, and saving that enabled her to accrue the funds necessary to cover her travel costs to India and the course fee. Part 15, The Hidden Charades, Secrets of Maharishi's Inner Circle Unveiled. I began to suspect what was going on during their secret, late nights together. I also noticed that she began dressing differently from everyone else. Instead of the poor student, hippie chic, or cheap cotton Indian Punjabis commonly worn, she was suddenly rocking expensive saris, gold jewelry, and makeup too. All very uncommon in the ashram's almost anchoritic vibe. I wondered at this change, since in a casual chat she had told me of the work, scraping, and saving that enabled her to accrue the funds necessary to cover her travel costs to India and the course fee. Meanwhile, Abhay began to deteriorate. He neglected his appearance and became ever more negative about Maharishi. Instead of talking about the joys of service to the master, he began talking about immigrating to the U.S. and starting a new life. I now think this change was because he had direct knowledge that Maharishi and Judith were lovers. After all, he lived in Maharishi's house, and could have easily heard what was going on behind Maharishi's closed bedroom door. But we never discussed this subject openly, and so strong was my true believer mentality that I couldn't face that possibility. It's very hard to admit what you don't want to know. If things looked suspicious to me and Abe from the outside looking in, robes of silk, feet of clay makes abundantly clear what was really going on from the insider perspective. Maharishi first softened up his target by giving Judith special attention in public. Then he invited her to his house for private instruction. He led her to his shrine room in the basement, where the Mia grope occurred, and had her sit on the floor to his left. She got the impression that Maharishi was going to give me some kind of advanced meditation technique. Instead, he raised his hand and began stroking my hair. She felt herself flush, and recounts, "It was at that point that I finally realized the reason I was getting special attention might have something to do with me being a woman and him being a man." Then Maharishi, laughing nervously, admonished her, "Don't tell anyone." She agreed to keep their secret. Judith now became one of Maharishi's inner circle and a special favorite. He invited her to join him and a select group of insiders to travel with him to New Delhi, where he planned to visit a wealthy Indian family in their sumptuous home. When they arrived, out of the blue, Maharishi expressed dissatisfaction at the way Judith was wearing her only sari, made of cheap plain cotton. He instructed one of the women in the family to show her how properly to drape it. She practiced until she got it down, but Maharishi was still not satisfied with her appearance. He complained that the cloth in my sari was too coarse. It should be silk. So, Judith, though on a very tight budget, bought a pink silk one, and wore it for the master's approval. Still not good enough, Maharishi opined. He said, the silk should be of better quality. He then introduced her to an Indian couple and instructed them to take Judith to the Delhi market and help her pick out some saris and gold jewelry. The threesome spent the whole day shopping, Judith selecting saris of celestial color and some simple gold jewelry. Maharishi picked up the tab. She notes there was never a question of costs. When she displayed for him her new finery, he still wasn't impressed. He said the silk should be thinner, the highest quality silk chiffon, and the jewelry should be thinner and more refined too. Back she went for a fourth attempt, and finally hit the mark. The thin gold bracelets, the delicate gold chain necklace with coral beads, and the bright pink silk chiffon sari printed with small flowers really flapped Maharishi's jacks. "This is beautiful, beautiful," he burst out. And like any good sugar daddy, Maharishi piled on the gifts. From then on, Judith recalls, he gave me money to buy silk chiffon saris in a multitude of colors. And topped the buying spree off with a red wedding sari with the most amazing sequined embroidery. Bear in mind this saga of the saris. It will be a serious tell when we come to the story of Belinda and sexy Sadie in Mallorca.